Welcome to the podcast of the impossible. I'm Peter Wood, and my guest today is DC's most honest con man, Brian Curry. Hello, Brian. How are you?
Hey, Peter. I'm so excited to be here. Congratulations. You have a new podcast.
I'm excited. Yeah, this is us hanging out in our respective rooms chatting like we always do, but we figured It might be fun to pull back the curtain and let our friend listen in on some of the stuff that we chat about.
Awesome.
I don't
Peter
want
Wood fan.
Yes, yeah.
Is there a name for Peter Wood fans, by the way?
I mean, I'm trying to start Impossible Nation.
Impossible Nation. All right,
I think that's so stupid that I kind of love it. Like, hey, what's up, Impossible Nation? Just seems like the sort of thing that a morning DJ would say that I would hate. So that cracks me up, you know.
Well, I'll be the first member. I'm part of Impossible Nation.
Citizenship is tough in the Impossible Nation. There's a whole red tape process. It's bad. But all right, so I don't want this to be an official interview, but at the same time, I do think it's helpful for someone listening in to sort of have a sense at least of where you came from, and then we can eventually talk about sort of what's going on right now. I know that your first show was at Cox Farms, right?
That is correct. Yes.
It was that a fall festival sort of a thing?
That's exactly. It was walk around.
Okay.
At a fall festival for minimum wage.
Right.
I'm sure I was capital T terrible. It had to be awful, but I got the gig about 2 months after learning my first trick.
Okay.
And so I knew how much money I'd make over that month. And I went to this new store I'd never been to called Denny and Lee Magic Studio.
Right.
And I spent every dollar I was going to make before the gig buying tricks, because I knew I didn't have enough material. And I brought them back, and that was my first gig. It was like a month-long gig.
Dang.
And I was blown away. I was like, my friends were like delivering newspapers, and I was making more in a week, in a day doing magic tricks than they were for like a week or two.
Yeah.
And so, that
How
was
awesome was that? That's oh no, I mean, and I definitely remember that feeling of like, and for me, I had you had 2 months. I had 4 years between when I got my first magic kit and then when I did my first show for money. And so for me, it was like, it was a hobby for the majority of elementary school. Right.
Right.
And then the realization that people are willing to pay me to do this hobby was awesome.
It's mind blowing.
Yeah. But it's super cool that your timetable was that much tighter, where you were just like, you went pro faster than most of the magicians that I know. Like in terms
it was
of,
it was pure luck. There was Aaron Cox Richards was in my class.
Okay.
And I was practicing my trick on some kids, and Aaron's like, "Hey, we want to hire a magician.
Right.
Do you want to do it?" And I said, "Absolutely," having no idea what I was getting into.
Sure.
I just said yes.
And
what was your first trick?
How old?
Do you remember your first trick?
It must have been so it was the Blackstone Junior magic kit. When I say I knew it as Blackstone, and then years later I found out like, oh, his dad was even more famous. So Blackstone Junior's magic kit. But that's the whole first trick thing. I don't like, it was a bunch, right? I got 12 right out of the gate. So I can tell you what all those tricks were, but there wasn't one that like someone picked me up at a magic shop or whatever.
Do you remember the first trick you performed for somebody? Is there like a memory of like the first time you got a good response from your mom or your friends or whatever?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, the double-edged sword is that because I got started, I mean, I was 6 when I got this kit. And so, and I only know that now through forensic research of photos and old beta tapes from back in that day, sort of for years, up until about 2 years ago, I would have sworn it was at my 5th birthday. And then I found a video. I do remember that it was my good friend Charlie Hughes. His older brother had a Blackstone magic kit, and I coveted it so hard. And I found a video of him doing a show at my 6th birthday using this magic kit, and that was the realization. Like, okay, wait, I couldn't have been 5, because here's the footage of him doing a show. And I believe that what the deal was, that like he came, he did this little show for all of us. And then my parents were like, oh, and hey, guess what? We got you on too,
Oh, that's a good gift. Good
Yeah,
job, Jack.
yeah. It was very cool. So, but so it was, you know, all like cardboard magic kit type stuff, you know. It's and how old were you at the Cox Farm time? You were in school?
13,
13.
13 years
Okay.
old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So that's definitely an exciting time to be getting into that. Why did you I mean, you mentioned Friends with Paper Routes. Did you do any other, were there any side hustles before that? Like, was that your first source of
I've
income?
never, well, that's almost true. I've never had a job other than magic, except for at college. I was in the scene shop for a little while
Mhm.
because I wanted to learn how to build magic tricks. So
Oh, okay. Okay.
it was magic adjacent, but that's the only thing that's paid me money that wasn't from magic.
Right. Right.
Um,
Awesome. Okay.
so
Oh, very cool.
yeah, never had a real job.
Well, it's, you know, no, I've done some random odd, I mean, like internship type stuff, and, you know, worked some retail in high school, but yeah, same, like magic has always been, the primary source of income, even if I had another side hustle or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
But where I realize how, fortunate we are to, like, that's a rare thing, starting as young as we did and then still doing
Yeah.
it now feels commonplace to us. And then you realize how bonkers that is, you know?
I'm also struck at how lucky we were to be from this area
Mhm.
because I mean, if I were when we were kids, there was no internet. Well, certainly not much internet,
Yeah,
and it wasn't. I couldn't have been in the middle of Iowa, away from every magic store on the
sure.
planet, and made a living out of this. It wouldn't have happened. So I had to be near Bob Sheets, near all these people that would, Danny and all the people who would influence me.
Right, right,
Um,
right, right. Well, and
DC, New
also,
York, LA. There's a few hubs,
yeah,
and this happens to be one of them.
no,
So
I mean, I think that's, yeah, totally. Like, I grew a market. I mean, I grew my client base in both the Baltimore and the DC markets, just because I grew up kind of equidistant between the two, and
mhm.
and I'm very fortunate, like that I'm able. There is enough work between those two major areas. Whereas, like you say, if we were in the middle of, you know, somewhere, especially pre-internet, where it's harder to find clients and fly to gigs and things like that, we were able to cut our teeth with staying local, but also staying busy while still staying local. You know.
Right.
And you're still local. You know, for anyone who's watching this on the video version, they'll see under your face there, it says agoodliar.com. And I have known you since the beginnings and even pre A Good Liar. But the show you're doing right now, which we should pimp, is at the Capitol Hilton.
Yep.
Most Saturday nights. Is that a fair?
Many Saturday.
Okay.
It depends on the season, but like, yeah, let's say
Sure.
most
Sure.
Saturday nights.
More often than not. Yeah.
Usually at 8 o'clock. Sometimes there's a 5 o'clock show too.
Okay.
And yeah, get your tickets online.
And
Book your
that's been
tickets.
going on since before COVID.
It started a couple months before COVID, which was a
Yeah.
real unfortunate
Yeah.
timing.
You know, at least
But
you were able
you know,
to come back.
it survived.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, so and I'm curious about we've talked about this a little bit, and again, I was sort of around for it, but I'm curious with the benefit of retrospect, you know, 2020, thinking hindsight 2020, not the year 2020. Sort of what was there? Can you look to one kernel or seed of what became the show that's The Good Liar? Like, was there a thing that you saw, or a thing that happened, or something you
Well,
were trying to be
there's
inspired
two
by?
things.
Okay.
There are two things that about it kind of came together. One was I've always loved mentalism, but I've always had these weird ethical issues with mentalism. I've never wanted to pretend to be a real psychic. It seems ethically weird and wrong. And there are a insignificant portion of the population that believe it.
Hmm.
And then for a long time, I did the mentalism as psychology, the pseudoscience part of it,
Hmm.
which is how most guys do it now. And I still felt gooey. I felt gross. I had people come up after the show and say, "Man, you must be using mnemonics and this and all stuff that I know about." And sure, does it dabble in that? Maybe, but in truth, I'm just a magician pretending to read minds.
Right.
And so once I came up with this premise of The Good Liar, where I could expose that literally everything is fake, I finally felt comfortable doing a whole show of mentalism. So that came along with the same time in the news. The Good Liar and the show I did before this, which was called The Magic Duel, they both came about because of things that I was interested in outside of magic. The Magic Duel came from, I was reading some books on script writing. This one came because of the news and alternative facts. So we were, you know, in the news, we were all going about, what's an alternative fact? Is that a thing or is it a lie? You know, is it possible to have two versions of the same fact? And it was just this kind of crazy discussion over whether it's possible for a lie to be true. And it occurred to me, it's easier to lie to a group of people and get them to believe you than to convince that same group of people they've been lied to. So how would I convince a group that they've been lied to? So I came up with this whole show to, like, I start off telling them I'm going to lie to them, and then I lie to them, and then I show them how I lied to them. You know, it's right. Because otherwise they're going to say, well, you know, that part was true. No, everything was fake.
Right.
So that's kind of, I know that's kind of a weird way to describe it. But that's where it came from. That's where this show came from.
No, I think that's, I mean, I've seen it, I guess at least twice now. And I think that's a great way to describe it. Like, there is sort of I think as a mentalist, you kind of want to be dancing around on that edge where, to some degree, what we are selling is make believe, right?
Right.
We are selling that sort of escapism. We want people to be able to suspend some disbelief and have that childlike sense of wonder and blah, blah, blah. I mean, all that's important. But at the same time, when you are finished watching Harry Potter, most of those viewers do not believe that was a documentary. Like, most people understand that it was fiction, and there were special effects and actors So, you know, I'm excited that they took me on that journey, but then you have to walk this weird line of, if people don't realize that you're saying all these things under a proscenium arch that isn't actually there, but is there, you know. And so have you always, in terms of your sort of like morality of mentalism, do you have any sort of, has that always been pretty much where you are now, or has there been any sort of arc or journey about presenting it that way?
I'm not as hardcore as like Penn and Teller and some of these other guys. I don't really care what other people do as much. I don't like when they pretend it's real and then they sell you books on, you know, discover your psychic potential. Like, all that to me seems like snake oil, and I find that dubious. I'm mostly I just need to worry about myself type of thing. I heard a quote once, and I think this really, it's always stuck with me, and I wish I knew who said it. So maybe if anyone listening knows, just email me, because I would love to know who said this. But I was learning about the Enlightenment age, and somebody said, a good man changes the world, a great man enlightens it. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, if I'm a mind reader or even a mentalist pretending that it's something it's not, I'm making the world dumber. And is that what I want to do with my whole life? Just like at the end of my life's done, I made people dumber. People left believing something that I know not to be true because I wanted to make money. It just never felt great to me. So yeah, I mean, I for a long time drank the Kool-Aid of, let's just pretend it's science, and that was okay. And then the problem, once I started getting good at that, and people would come and talk to me, and it was clear that they really believed me. You know, they believed the pseudoscience, because a lot of it is based in truth. And then that's true of other guys too. It just tips its toe. Like all good lies, you start with the truth and you blend the line between fact and fiction. And so it's really hard for people who don't know what exactly you're doing to figure out where that line is. So that's my arc.
No, I think that makes sense. And yeah, it is like, one of the arguments that I hear against mentalists in particular talk about disclaimers, and you know, a disclaimer in our world means at some point during the show you remind the audience that what you're doing is not real, that it's theater, and the argument against that is always Peter Pan or Macbeth, you know, where you tell, at no point does someone come out on stage and say, don't worry, Peter Pan is not actually flying. He there are wires, you know, and then or if you're doing a production of Macbeth, and at the end someone comes out and says, listen, everyone who died in the show, that was just pretend. We did not actually murder someone on stage. Of course that sounds absurd, but I do I do think that there is something about if it's not, especially like a lot of the places where we are performing, it's not an official enough theater where they sit in theater seats and a curtain opens and there are lights on us. Like, because we are able to do our thing in the corner of a coffee shop or at the one end of a ballroom.
Yeah.
You and I would think about those as stage shows and theatrical environments, but it's not like they're buying a ticket to a play or a musical.
Mhm.
And so do you feel like that changes out the responsibility? I say our, I shouldn't say our because I
You're not.
thank, I've painted myself into this wonderful corner where, as a collector of the impossible,
Yeah. You can't do
it's,
mentalism.
yeah, well, and I hope that the things are so outlandish that somebody realizes, like, nah, nope, that, I mean, that it's because it's too good to be true, then they just go along with it, as opposed to, like you say, what a lot of what you're doing starts in reality, but then there is a secret or a trick or a method that is sort of pushing it beyond that, you know? So have you ever done anything in terms of, like, even before The Good Liar, did you just didn't say anything, right? Like, in terms of a disclaimer.
Well, in my presentation, I would use pseudopsychology, right?
Okay.
I would
Okay.
never claim to be asking the spirits or looking into their soul. I mean, maybe I did at some point as a kid, but it was never believable. And
Sure.
I think that when you do it in a magic show, it softens it an awful lot,
I think
right?
so. Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
surround it by tricks, it's still to me, it's under the umbrella of tricks.
Right.
Whereas if
Right.
you're doing a whole show of reading minds and that stuff,
Hmm.
it's a different angle. And again, I don't really care what other guys do. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
what but I never thought of that in terms of like the theater. Like if I were at the Kennedy Center, maybe I don't think a disclaimer is really necessary. You're at the Kennedy Center.
Yeah.
You buy tickets to a play about a mind reader. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. I haven't thought that deep about it, frankly. But
I mean, yeah. I guess just the strange, you've got this all the world's a stage thing where, I mean, the good news and the bad news is that you and I can do what we do in a variety of places. But then that also has its own weird challenges. And so, again, an unintended benefit of the Collector of the Impossible persona is that people do not come up to me after a show and ask me to do something off the cuff, because
right.
they've seen that it is established that I've got these weird things and I bring out the thing and I demonstrate how it's done and then the thing goes away.
Mhm.
Do you have any stories of either with your current show or at any point previously, like, interactions with people after the show who maybe not even bought into it more than they should have, but just sort of hitting you up for read my mind or that kind of thing?
Yeah, right on the cusp of I was doing another show that I called A Gentleman and a Liar, and that was I was playing it as psychology.
Okay.
And at the time I remember there was two tricks that people came and talked to me most about. One was where I memorized a deck of cards, and the other was where I guessed the lottery. I had people call out numbers and it was on the lottery ticket.
Mm.
And the lottery ticket one, I remember someone coming up after me going, "What number am I thinking of right now?" Like, people, they buy into it just enough, or that they're at least curious. They're wondering, is it real? And it just felt gooey to me. I mean, good for them. It's good imagination that they believe in that. And I guess the first time I ever saw a mentalist that I remember seeing a full mentalism show, I think was Mark Salem. I saw him do his show when I was a kid. They snuck me in. I don't think I was old enough to go,
Right.
but I remember saying, I know it's fake, but I don't know how. I mean, maybe some of it's real. Like, as a kid, I started to question because he was so effing good.
Right.
That he made me dumber. Like, I started wondering, oh, well, maybe there is something that I don't know, which,
Yeah.
I don't know. As I'm
That's
getting older.
You and I have never talked about the whole, like, worried about making people dumber. And it's a weird, he didn't make you dumber. He helped put you on the path of your current career,
That's why I don't get upset at other guys who make a different choice.
Yeah.
And that's,
yeah.
I just know that there's just something in me. It doesn't feel right when I do it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, Penn Jillette got disillusioned, pun intended, by both magicians and scientists because of the amazing Kreskin. because
Right.
Kreskin was selling a kit of it wasn't even a magic kit. It was basically a snake oil. It was hokum, and it was masquerading as science. And Penn, I believe his parents used their hard-earned money to buy this, and turns out it's all a fraud. And for years, Penn was pissed at both scientists and magicians, thought that we were in collusion with each other, and it's all BS. And then thankfully, we're all pleased that he came around and found this guy who doesn't talk, and the rest is history.
God, I hope he kept that kit. That's amazing.
I
didn't know that story.
I bet you he threw it out in rage. I mean, I bet you that he was so grumpy about it. I'm sure you can still find like a kit, but I'd be surprised if Penn's is still around, you know?
That's awesome. I've never heard that story. I love it.
Yeah, no, it's,
and of course, James Randi was his, their teacher, right? I mean, he was one of their big things.
Yeah.
So he's the ultimate skeptic.
Yeah, I think, well, and I don't know, for me, it's hard to tell the chicken egg sort of thing, but do you have a sense of how your skepticism and your magic knowledge have grown? Like, do you feel like you were skeptical? I mostly ask this because you started later than I did. So like, there aren't a lot of 7-year-old skeptics walking around. So I have no concept of what that might've been like, but were you more wide-eyed and innocent before you started learning magic about that, or do you know if there was any sort of change there?
I'm not sure. That's a great question. It's hard to say because I think I became more skeptical in college.
Okay.
When I think a lot of people become more skeptical, even if they're not doing magic tricks. So I was much more religious when I was a kid. I was raised Catholic. And I kind of just, my parents said, this is what we believe. And I said, okay, thank you. And then in college, you start to come up with what you believe and and that's where it definitely is when I became more skeptical. And I think after college, it continued. It just kind of kept growing.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think magic probably seeing how easy it was to fool people and get them to believe you. And there were, I've had multiple incidents, and I'm sure you have too, where I meet somebody, typically they're from a different continent, that believe in real magic, and they believe magic is evil. I remember a school that I do educational school shows, and I was doing a school in Harrisonburg, and I got a very apologetic email from the PTA mom saying, hey, I'm so embarrassed, but there's somebody who thinks that magic comes from the devil. Can you please just write her an email telling her that it's tricks?
Interesting.
And I'm really sorry. And so I did. And then she wrote back and she said, well, why would you call yourself a magician? Magic comes from the devil. And once you invite the devil in, you can't get him out. And this and that and the other thing. And I wrote another. And again, these are emails that I wrote. I had my wife check. I had my parents who are super religious check to make sure that they're as polite and non-judgy as I want them to be. And
sure.
And eventually I forwarded this email chain to my contact. She forwarded to the principal, and the principal's like, yeah, we're just going to have him. We can't kowtow to this nonsense.
Sure.
And but there are people like that. And I've had multiple things throughout my career. And I think that's made me more skeptical too, is that people they really believe stuff sometimes. So.
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately, your audience is a self-selected sample. Like that mom would never buy a ticket to a show that smelled like a magic show. But if we're talking about a child is attending school and you assume that they're not going to bring in the devil, and then all of a sudden they announce that someone is coming there to bring in the devil, that's I understand why it's a whole nother arena, but that definitely happens, Yeah. Well, I want to talk to you more. We're gonna have to save that for another episode. If anyone is curious to see how Brian lets the devil in to his life and the life of his audiences on most Saturday nights. It's at the Capitol Hilton in Washington, D.C. For all the information for tickets, you can go to agoodliar.com. And then to follow all of Brian's adventures on social media, you can head on over to briancurrylies.com. And for me, I think that is it for this episode of the Podcast of the Impossible. But for my public shows and social media and special projects and more, head on over, please, to oftheimpossible.com. I'm Peter Wood. Thanks.